How do I know what I need to have in place? How are you going to check it? And what does it mean for me with my contracts?
FedRAMP, on the other hand, has generally just been focused on kind of the first stop, but for many cloud service providers, those CSPs, they do it all in-house. CMMC is an attempt to get further down the chain, so it feels right, but it is going to impact a lot of companies as a result. Ugh, I'm gonna start that over. Hang on.
I do that every time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Hive Live. I'm Alex Netty, and I'm glad you've joined us for an incredible episode today with our super special on all things government cybersecurity compliance. Hopefully, you've been following along with all of our great approachable cybersecurity content on social media. But if you haven't, you can find us and give us a follow on all the major channels under @Hive Systems. So make sure you give us a follow and subscribe today. If you work for a cloud service provider or a defense contractor and support the federal government, then you should be closely following the recent deluge of updates that are coming out and happening in the world of cybersecurity requirements. Lots of processes are changing around all of your favorite government-related cybersecurity frameworks, and if you've fallen behind, fear not. We're going to cover all of them today. So to help with this, I've set up a formidable team and call it our Formidable Federal Roundtable with Katie Dotson and Andrew Bradley, who are experts on all things federal cybersecurity compliance. They've diligently been combing through all of these recent releases. We've been chatting a lot internally about it and pulling out all of the most interesting bits. So let's get right into it. Andrew, for you, you have worked closely in the federal space for many years and seen lots of things. Katie, you're the only person of the three of us that has actually been a federal government employee. So we've got lots of ground to cover today. My first thought here is around FedRAMP, the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, and it's been codified into law, even though it's only been around, or actually been around for over 8 years. The recent changes in terms of its codification have brought about some big changes, and most notably around the FedRAMP PMO and the Joint Authorization Board, or JAB. Lots of things are happening there. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you to get started here.
So one of the things that everybody's been kind of waiting to hear a little bit more about is the end of the JAB. The Joint Authorization Board is finally officially no longer. It's been sitting in kind of a state of limbo for the past year. People have been, especially people with JAB authorizations, cloud service providers with JAB authorizations, have been kind of waiting to see, what was going to happen. FedRAMP decided last year after the memo, the FedRAMP modernization memo came out, that they were going to move away from the Joint Authorization Board, and they were talking about setting up something called the FedRAMP board, and there was going to be some other workflows that they were going to be working on, like multi-agency authorizations and things like that. But the JAB is finally no longer, and the FedRAMP program is moving to a single authorization pathway via an agency authorization. So what does that mean?
For me about all of that, though, is that they rolled out 853 Rev 5, and they were talking about the templates for the SSP for FedRAMP, and they were doubling down on it right in there where they're talking about only JAB authorized CSPs can use other JAB authorized CSPs. And so is this wild world where everyone's counting on this thing. They seem to be doubling down the JAB, and in the flick of a wrist, this has passed, and it's the end of it. So here we are.
Yeah. So, I mean, the goal for the FedRAMP PMO is to have all the current cloud services that are authorized with a JAB authorization transition to an agency by 10/31/2024. And a lot of the requirements that you saw in FedRAMP, the Rev 5 updates that were specific to the JAB, are going away. So anything that was a JAB specific requirement is going to be either left to the mission owner or the procuring agency to define on their own, or they're going to be subject to the standard agency authorization requirements that are built into the low, moderate, or high baselines. So a lot of those things, like you can only connect to a JAB authorized system, can only connect to a JAB authorized system. A JAB authorized system may only use externally authorized JAB auth systems. That stuff is going away, which is good news for some, but also there's this level of uncertainty and kind of hesitancy amongst cloud service providers right now, because they just don't know what this means. Who's going to be picking up the tab for their agency authorization? They're going to have to coordinate with their agencies to basically find a sponsor, like a traditional agency authorization pathway would have, and that agency is going to have to foot the bill moving forward. That agency is also going to be the primary party responsible for the conmon aspect of this whole process. Previously, the JAB did a lot of the conmon reviews for JAB authorized systems, and now that's going to fall back to the agencies that take on the burden of these cloud service offerings and cloud service providers to do that stuff and to coordinate and to make sure that they're providing the feedback to the cloud service providers when they need to. So it's an interesting path forward.
I think that's the wild part to me is especially there's this uncertainty. I think it's that the FedRAMP PMO is becoming more of just that, a project management office, whereas before they were both a project management office, but also an arbiter of the process. So for a lot of agencies, it was a great opportunity to centralize it and defer responsibility and accountability for it, which is good, right? Takes the onus out of those agencies, has one central body that is effectively applying those principles in the same way across every CSP that comes through. So there were some opportunities. I think, as we noted, though, there was a big choke point around what the PMO was and how it was operating before. So, yeah, I don't love the uncertainty, but at the same time, the existing process wasn't exactly working either. So, I don't know. Katie, what are your thoughts on kind of a path forward for the PMO and agencies on the whole?
Well, so the PMO had a FAQ for those who were already JAB authorized just a couple weeks ago to try to clarify some of these points. And it does sound like they're going to be heavily involved in meeting with the CSPs, trying to identify who the best lead agency is going to be. So on the bright side, they're not expecting the CSPs who are JAB authorized to figure that out themselves. But it does seem like it's going to be a pretty quick turnaround to have all new lead agencies identified by the end of October. So I do look forward to seeing what that looks like. I do think they have a long path ahead of them to get there, and I'm very curious to see how that goes. I do think it sounds like GSA, DoD, and DHS are still going to be heavily involved in the capacity that they already are. But to Andrew's point, certain things about Conmon are going to change. There's going to be new lead agencies for all of these different organizations. They're taking off the JAB authorization from the FedRAMP marketplace altogether. So even if you were JAB authorized, it's not really going to be noticeable anymore. So
not a bigger badge of honor these days. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, going back to Andrew's point, it's going to be a risk-based decision from your contracting agency, how they want to move forward with what interconnections you have. And that is going to have a lot of unknown, because if one agency is fine with you using a non-previously JAB authorized cloud and another one's not, then what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of a grab bag of changes coming out of FedRAMP as well. FIPS obviously is starting to come into the post-quantum era. FIPS 140-3 is being talked about, so definitely some changes there. Andrew, I think you had caught that Microsoft rolled out some new FIPS validated things as well.
Yeah, Microsoft rolled out a couple new platforms that received FIPS validation. I believe it was 140-3 even. So Windows 11, Server 2022, and a couple of other operating system variants there, and Azure Host Stack stuff is now included in that list. So if you guys have, if you're using Azure or Microsoft products, and you are working on your cryptographic module verification table or a verification program table, go take a look at the validation list and you update your certificate numbers. The other thing there, like you mentioned, post-quantum is a big topic these days, especially after the OMB memo, and recently the White House put out an additional letter just kind of reaffirming the commitment to post-quantum cryptography and the shift over to that. So there's been not really any published hard guidance yet from OMB or from FedRAMP on this subject, but we're expecting to see something come down the pipeline, especially as the transition to FIPS 140-3 validated modules comes into play. And part of that FIPS 140-3 validation program includes, right now it's a little bit of a light touch, but includes digging into the module's resistance to quantum computing. So that's something that CSP should keep on their radar, especially as you're looking at their transition plan from FIPS 140-2 to 140-3. Katie, do you happen to remember the date on that? I think it's September 2026 is the deadline, I believe. I could double check that.
Sounds familiar, but I'd have to.
I think it's September 2026 is the deadline for transition from FIPS 140-2 to 140-3. At which point, everything that's in 140-2 that isn't in 140-3 will be labeled historical, and you won't be able to use it anymore. So, CSP should start planning for that right now.
Other things to plan on too. There's the big transition to OSCAL so consolidated and centralized syntax for reporting. Basically, it's supposed to help with Kanban stuff in the future. So rather than these manual aggregations of reports that many CSPs create and send to their authorizing agencies every month, it'll be more automated. And they've also put out a request for a GRC product. We're guessing probably to centralize SSPs and management of them. Of course, famously, FedRAMP just moved off of OMB Max and over to the USDA. So again, making changes only to make changes again. So CSPs, hang on. That's enough on FedRAMP for me. Let's jump from one side of the river to the other side, and it's over to Virginia to the Pentagon, and it's the CMMC program. CMMC is coming in hot and is no longer just a pipe dream, but after years of delays, infighting, and changes, it is very much happening. We're in the final stages of its publication, officially hitting the federal record, making it law. That, of course, means that many of the larger defense industrial-based companies are trying to get ahead. They're trying to hold themselves accountable and be prepared, but also their third-party vendors that support them that will eventually fall in the scope for CMMC. So for big companies, they're getting ready. Smaller companies who think they won't be touched may be touched sooner than they think. Katie, let's talk a little about some of those recent changes that have come out and some estimated timelines on things.
Yeah, so obviously last year, if anybody's been paying attention to CMMC, 32 CFR came out as a proposed rule at the end of the year. It went over what the CMMC program is, what the control requirements are, the different levels, and we actually have a whole CMMC 101 Hive Live that gets into that in a lot of detail. But that was the first half of the CMMC program, the what is it, and now the how is it going to be enforced has come out with 48 CFR. So that proposed rule was dropped earlier this month, and it gets into the details of how the CMMC levels are going to be applied in solicitations and contracts. So basically what that proposed rule gets into is that the appropriate CMMC level for the contract will be established early on in the solicitation. So whether you have to do level 1, level 2 self-assessment, a level 2 certification with a C3 PAO, or a level 3 certification is going to be established in the solicitation, and you have to have it by the date of contract award. If you don't have the appropriate level uploaded into SPRS by then you will not get the contract. So there's some pretty heavy implications there. That does also apply to existing contracts that are exercising option years. So if you don't have the correct level by the time that your option year contract is up, then you could lose that contract as well.
Brutal.
So it's pretty brutal. And a lot of people have not necessarily been paying attention to that, especially certain flow down requirements for the your supply chain. As a prime, the 48 CFR rule says you have to flow down those requirements, and you are responsible for making sure that your subs have their score uploaded to SPRS as well. And so that means that your subs should be aware of what level you are requiring of them. They should have the appropriate level of assessment, and it does need to be uploaded and validated in SPRS before they can be part of your contract award as well. So a lot around 48 CFR. It was a shorter one, especially by comparison to 32 CFR last year. But it basically gets straight into the point of, how do I know what I need to have in place? How are you going to check it? And what does it mean for me with my contracts?
I do want to talk a little about those levels and kind of how those get laid out and passed down between, those kind of first tier, if you will, DIB companies and those that they work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So level 1 is your most basic level of CMMC requirement. It's if you have federal contract information in your environment, then you need to have a level 1 self-assessment completed. There's only 15 basic controls required around level 1. They're dictated by FAR 52204-21. But most people don't realize the federal contract information does include just general contract data. So if you're sitting here thinking we don't get CUI, we don't need to worry about CMMC, if you do any sort of DoD contracting, wherever you are storing the contract information and wherever that data is flowing to and from the DoD, you're going to have to protect it with those 15 controls, self-assess, and upload your score into SPRS. So keep that in mind if you think CMMC is not going to apply to you because you don't have CUI. Then level 2 is where it gets a little more involved. Level 2 is for those companies that will be, accessing, processing, transmitting CUI. For that level, you need to implement all the NIST 800-171 controls. As of right now, that is level 2, even though NIST not level 2, revision 2. Even though Rev 3 for NIST 800-171 is out, there's no way for the DoD to assess Rev 3 just yet. So there is an exception in place that's kind of currently indefinitely in place to make sure that you can continue to use revision 2. But it's something to keep in mind moving forward, that one day DoD will decide that that is no longer the case, and you will then have to worry about revision 3. But there's 110 different controls that you have to apply for NIST 800-171. You've got to appropriately scope your environment based on where that CUI is flowing. And then depending on the contract, you can conduct a self-assessment and do your own assessment, upload the score into SPRS. Or if they require a certification, then that means you have to be assessed by a C3PAO. And you have to pass with flying colors in order to get that certification, in order to be eligible for contract award. Oof. And then on top of that is level 3. So level 3 is for certain levels of CUI that may be of more interest to advanced persistent threats. So that's, again, going to be determined by the contracting office. And if they expect you to have level 3, then you have to have a level 2 certification assessment from a C3PAO first, and then get a second assessment from DIBCAC on the extra controls that they're adding to cover down level 3. So lots of different requirements there, and the level of involvement between the self-assessment and the certification assessment varies a lot as well. But you do have to upload all of that into SPRS. You have to have an official who attests to that score being accurate every year. And if you misrepresent that score, there are some pretty big implications that could fall under the False Claims Act and have some pretty heavy fines and other regulatory repercussions there.
And I do feel like this is all commensurate with how the defense industrial base is set up, right? Oftentimes, the building a fighter jet, while it's got a Lockheed Martin stamp on it, it comes from hundreds, if not thousands of suppliers. And so the goal of the program here is to take advantage of that trickle-down supply chain that has been the hallmark of the defense industrial base to date, and say, hey, we want every step in that process to be secure so that nothing slips through the cracks. FedRAMP, on the other hand, has generally just been focused on kind of the first stop, but for many cloud service providers, those CSPs, they do it all in-house. Maybe they have contractors and vendors, but it's kind of a one-stop shop, even though they may leverage other authorizations, which are protected under FedRAMP. CMMC is an attempt to get further down the chain. So it feels right, but it is going to impact a lot of companies as a result. And while we talk about companies, though, in the defense industrial base, they're not the only ones who are touching or controlled unclassified information. Many higher education institutions also do, oftentimes through grants and other research opportunities from the DoD. And it was just recently that it came out that there's been a little bit of a problem down with the rambling wreck of Georgia Tech. The Georgia Tech Research Group, or GTRC, unfortunately has been asserting claims that those defendants knowingly failed to meet cybersecurity requirements in connection with the Department of Defense contracts. That is text straight from the DOJ, who is bringing a suit against the university as a result of not protecting information, and as Katie noted, under the False Claims Act. Again, CMMC isn't even officially live, but DOJ is already pouncing on this early. Unfortunately, I'm going to guess they're going to want to set a couple examples of this to show people that this program has teeth early. So again, our recommendation is get on top of this early if you have not. Again, CMMC can be scoped. It doesn't have to impact your whole organization. It can just impact certain parts, certain technologies, and there's ways to segment and isolate and protect yourself as a company that doesn't impact the way you work or potentially even cost as much as a massive rollout. So again, if you don't think this is happening and you work with those in the defense industrial base or directly with federal agencies who do, the time is now. Katie, any parting thoughts on CMMC?
Other than at this point, if you think you're ready for CMMC, do your own gap assessment, do your own readiness assessment, engage a third party that knows everything about CMMC to make sure that you are ready come time that it drops. Could be as early as January for the trajectory that they're currently on with this proposed rule. And if you already have all your controls in place and you are ready for CMMC and want to get ahead, you could also look and see if you are eligible for a JSVA. Those are going to hold the same weight as a CMMC level 2 certification assessment from a C3PAO. So that's just an option that you have available now. There are some companies getting those already in the defense industrial base. So worth a look if you are ready for CMMC already.
Excellent. Staying inside the Pentagon and probably jumping to another ring within it, it's our other favorite Pentagon program, the DoD Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide, or SRG. Many years ago, the DoD and federal agencies and executive agencies all merged their requirements, which was really nice because everything is a circle. We've come back to the DoD starting to separate themselves from federal agencies again for reasons unknown to us and everybody who's working with them. That being said, a lot of the updates that recently occurred to FedRAMP have been reflected over to the DoD CCSRG, which is good news. Andrew, you've been following along on some of those. Obviously, within federal agencies, they moved from NIST 853 Rev 5. And so as a result, it sounds like there's been some changes to those DoD impact level requirements recently as well.
Yeah, so the CCSRG has been updated to basically reflect a lot of the Rev 5 control additions. So supply chain risk management comes into play now, but the overlays have changed pretty drastically. DoD went through, DISA went through, and basically cut out a lot of the dead weight for the controls and remove some of the stuff that was redundant or didn't really make sense in the context of the impact level of the systems that they were applying those baselines to. So for IL2, IL4, IL5, and IL6 systems, there's an expectation that you'll be moving to this new Rev 5 updated version of the CCSRG sometime in the future. There hasn't been any direct guidance from the DoD on a transition period or a transition timeline, but CSP should be aware that it is right around the corner. And so just touching a little bit on what's changed within the CCSRG. Basically, the IL4 baseline itself removed about 38 controls, but added about 20. So you're getting about a net loss of 38 controls that you're required to implement. But from an actual control implementation perspective, if you look at the controls they removed, they didn't remove anything that wasn't already redundant. So you're not getting off the hook with like, oh, there's 18 less controls that I have to account for. It's actually, you still have to account for all the processes and controls. They've just been streamlined or merged into other controls. So they've added 20 controls to the IL4 baseline, but removed 38. For the IL5 baseline, they've removed 47 controls from the revision 4 baseline and added 21 controls. Most of these added controls are the SR control family and some of the other ones that are net new from Rev 5. And then for IL5, there's now an NSS specific baseline, which this one is a little bit different. So they've removed 47 controls from the Rev 4 baseline, but from the Rev 4 IL5 baseline, but they've added 178 in this new NSS specific, National Security System specific baseline for IL5 systems. So if you have an IL5 system that's storing or processing, mission critical CUI, it's not necessarily an NSS system, but it's still an IL5 system. So you still have to meet the IL5 requirements. So that's where the regular IL5 baseline comes into play. But if you're storing national security information in an IL5 system now you have to add these 178 specific Rev 5 controls from the updated baseline that they published for that.
And then
that's IL6
a tough position for lots of CSPs, right? Because for those that manage a FedRAMP environment and they say, hey, maybe we want to use the same FedRAMP environment for our IL environment as well. Many of them may be faced with separating and segmenting them. So the money has to be worth it to make those separations and segmentations and likely duplications of services worthwhile.
And it's quite a leap too, right? It's 178 added controls despite the 47 or so that were removed from the Rev 4 baseline. It is quite a bit of work, and so you have to. CSP should really work with their DISA AO and their points of contact, their procuring business unit or office to determine really understand what the data classification is that's being input into their system, right? Whatever they're ingesting, because the worst thing you could possibly do here is assume you're only ingesting CUI, mission critical CUI, and in actuality you're ingesting NSS, and now you put yourself behind the 8 ball, and potentially there could be audit ramifications down the road. So people will definitely want people with IL5 designations right now will definitely want to double check the classifications of data that's going in and out of their system. There's also updates to the IL6 baseline with about 209 added controls, which is not too much. It's just on top of the IL5 NSS baseline, but it still maintains the classified overlay as well. The mission owner SLAs have changed a little bit. I won't talk too much about the mission owner control changes, because not a lot of people end up using the mission owner specific control baseline, so not too much to worry about there. The other major change here is logical and physical separation requirements. Used to be that you could run some IL5 workloads for a compute and storage layer, at least, inside of an IL4 authorized boundary. That's no longer the case. Any IL5 workloads now need to be physically separated, just like the old requirements for physical separation of IL5 and IL4, or DoD and non-DoD data sets, basically. So that's a pretty big change, that some of the systems that were previously grandfathered into an authorization at IL5, despite being infrastructure in an IL4, they'll have to take that into account and sort of start planning around that as well.
Yeah.
There's some new guidance for just-in-time access as well, lowering the investigation requirements for admins and engineers. So that should make things a little bit easier for people who are looking to get support staff and just having a ton of issues getting people cleared and able to support their GovCloud environments. And then the updated SSP controls have been actually released in an Excel addendum now. So that's nice, because before it was in that PDF and people had to scroll through the PDF and look at the little red print in the table, and it was a nightmare. So now they've actually released it in a proper Excel, modernization to an Excel.
I was going to say, it's
spreadsheet.
Small things like with FedRAMP,
right?
segmenting
Small
out the
wins.
appendix A with all the controls. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, at least you can manipulate it and move it around and copy and paste it now a lot easier than having to deal with like copying and pasting out of a PDF and it never working, right? But again, there's no transition guidance just yet from DISA on this, or from RE2 on it at all. So we're still in like playing a waiting game to see when that's going to hit. Yep, that's about it for the CCSRG.
I love it. And I did fail to note earlier, Katie has recently passed and become accredited as a certified cybersecurity practitioner and assessor. So especially as we get in the world of CMMC and you have questions, please reach out to us anytime and we'll be able to help with that. That's all the time we have for today. We want to thank you for joining us for our Federal Compliance Super Special. Hopefully, if you support one or all of these compliance program types at your organization, this episode helped clarify things. So be sure to share it with a colleague. And if you're struggling to manage the recent onslaught of changes, our experts here at Hive Systems can help make sure that you're ready to tackle any federal cybersecurity compliance challenges. So please reach out anytime by visiting us at www.hivesystems.com. Before we go, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can be alerted for our next episode by going to www.hivesystems.com/HiveLive. Next month, Katie is going to be diving into a specific area of FedRAMP with our Significant Change Requests 101 episode. So make sure you don't miss it by subscribing to our channel at www.hivesystems.com/HiveLive. Until next time, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to act and not react. Thank you.